Our next guest worked with Republican presidential hopeful Mitt Romney for 15 years at private equity firm Bain Capital. He was one of the first associates hired in 1984, and he appears in this now famous photo where Mr. Romney and members of the Bain team posed with dollar bills to celebrate an early deal. The photo was recently featured in TV ads run by a Democratic super PAC. Fast forward about 27 years, and Geoffrey Rehnert is now the co-CEO of Audax Group, a private equity firm that specializes in middle market companies. And he joins us from Boston. Mr. Rehnert, welcome to Bottom Line. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Sir, did you ever think that a photo you took almost 30 years ago would be part of a presidential campaign?
Not in a million years. It was a playful shot that we took after we raised our first fund, and meant we were in business and we'd succeeded in getting into what it was a very difficult business to get into. Still is even more difficult in some ways today. But it was kind of like playfully showing your first paycheck, and it's kind of amazing that it's been distorted and taken so far out of context to try to represent something that it does, that's not accurate.
Mr. Rehnert, describe your time at Bain Capital and tell us what you learned about Mitt Romney.
Well, I had the good fortune to be one of the two first associates when Bain Capital was getting started in 1984, and I worked there for 15 years. I worked side by side with Mitt in the early days. The first 4 or 5 years, there were really only 4 or 5 of us. As we entered the 1990s, the firm grew and grew very rapidly during that period of time. But I left in 1999, shortly after Mitt left to go run the Salt Lake City Olympics, and I guess I'd summarize it by saying, Mitt is the most capable person I've run across in my lifetime.
Well, how did Mr. Romney's time at Bain give him the insight that he says is necessary to be the next president of the United States?
Well, I'm not part of Mitt's campaign staff, and so
understood.
I don't know I don't know what he's saying or not saying. I haven't heard him say that his experience at Bain Capital is the only reason. I know he ran the Olympics, he was governor of Massachusetts, he's done quite a few other things other than Bain Capital. But I think his experience building Bain Capital, creating it from the outset, and then turning it into probably the most successful investment firm over a 15-year time horizon that certainly that our country's had. I think certainly would go into part of why he's qualified, and particularly qualified on economic matters and business affairs.
Mr. Rehnert, I'd like to get your response to something that Susan Milligan wrote in U.S. News and World Report, quoting here, "The reason Romney's argument isn't resonating more broadly is that he did not make his money off his own success. He made his money off of other people's failures," end quote. Is there any truth to that?
None. That's absurd. I haven't read that or heard that, but we only made money at Bain Capital if we were successful in making a company worth more than what it was worth when we either invested in it or acquired it.
Okay.
And the vast, while Mitt was at Bain Capital, while I was at Bain Capital, we made over 150 investments. The vast majority of those were successful, highly successful. 50 of those were startup companies where you only make money when you invest in a startup company if the company prospers and someone wants to acquire it or it can go public.
Okay.
And the vast majority of the private equity investments were highly successful. So, I don't know if that was written by someone in an opposing campaign or whether it's an objective journalist, but it's entirely inconsistent with the facts.
Well, sir, let me ask you about venture capitalism. If there is a failure, as you know, there is collateral damage. There are layoffs. Some have their benefits reduced or eliminated outright. In the event that that happens, we know that there is a risk. That's the nature of the business there. But was there any time when Bain Capital offered to help communities that were impacted by failed takeovers?
Well, Well, I think you're mixing a number of terms here. One is venture capital and private equity are actually two different types of investing, and Bain Capital did both. By venture capital, that's starting companies and investing in companies or creating companies that don't exist. And that's where a business comes together, people get jobs. Sometimes the businesses succeed, other times they don't, but the vast majority of Bain Capital's venture investments succeeded, and the well-known ones like Staples, Sports Authority, Bright Horizons, Centers for Children, are dramatic successes.
All right.
Private equity investments, there's a series of different kinds of private equity investments. There are growth capital investments where a acquisition of a company is made because the investor believes that company can be built further. There are other times where companies are acquired to turn them around, and in the process of turning around, there sometimes is a triage process where the company's going to go out of business unless something is done to make it more efficient. It may involve closing a plant. It may involve having to streamline the workforce. In the 1980s and 1990s, some private equity investments had those characteristics. Today, they're relatively few. There are a handful of firms that do turnaround private equity investing. But if you think about where the U.S. economy was in the 1980s, early 1990s, there were a lot of companies that were on the verge of going out of business, in large part due to foreign competition, the obsolete technologies. And Bain Capital bought a number of those companies, and most of those companies not only survived, but they thrived, prospered, and grew. So, in aggregate across 150 investments, were there a handful of companies that had to do layoffs? Yes, but it was a small handful. It was a minority, dramatic minority, and the number of jobs that were created swamp the number of jobs that were lost.